Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, from all of us coaches at the ICF Mumbai Chapter, and a warm welcome to the annual celebration called the International Coaching Week 2022. To set the context for you, over 50,000 plus coaches across 150 countries will come across together, and during this week, they will celebrate coaching and lead the conversation about how it makes an impact in the lives of individuals and organizations as a preferred development tool. This year's theme is Reimagine the Future. The Mumbai Chapter brings to you an opening act and 6 speakers in a panel discussion, and we are so excited to have put this together. Along with me have been my colleagues, Sarita Bell, taking the lead literally by being the first to volunteer herself, Ramya Rajaram, who's been supporting in so many ways on the creative sides, Shripad Ranade, Mamta Asthana, Prasad Pallav, Afshin Dattubhai, and Tushima Mukherjee, all of whom have contributed in some way or the other to make this event what it is today. So let's begin our evening, friends. To set the framework and context of this panel discussion, our panel today has 6 focus segments on sustainability, startups, healthcare, education, media and entertainment, and parenting. These are areas that are sure to impact our lives and also the lives of the next generation in times to come. At the end of the focus discussions will be an open house with our panelists. Kindly note that each panelist will be engaged in conversation with Mumbai Chapter field of work and then reimagine the future, what they see up ahead. The new campaign at the ICF Mumbai Chapter is about coaching is for all. So let me explain this a little bit to give you context. We believe that as healthy individuals, we may experience moments of self-doubt and confusion, or we may wish to set a new vision for ourselves, for our family, for our team, or for our organization, or make a transition. Or we may be a young adult like our dear Masoom, who just was performing, or a high potential at a large organization, or a C-suite executive, or a solopreneur. In all cases, a professionally trained coach can be of service to help you find your voice, feel safe as you share your vulnerability, and get the clarity as you make choices so that you can live your life with full potential. On a personal level, you may ask, I endeavor to live in the present moment. And yet there are so many thoughts that come to my mind. As the president, I want to make ripples by creating events that make impact, that spread the message of coaching, make ICF's vision of making coaching integral to society a reality, helping our coaches have their best practices out there, live the highest professionalism in their practices. As a parent, I try to cope with the new ways of being of my children. For example, my daughter says, there's no way that I want to have children. So I said, okay, so you don't want to have children. And I'm not even sure I want to get married. My son says, I want to make a career in game writing. I said, what's game writing all about? So writing the story of the game. I said, but is there a need for this? So I'm like battling with all these challenges as a parent, even though I've been a parent for over almost 28 years, right? As a solopreneur, I'm constantly trying to chase with what my clients are trying to adapt to, how are they dealing with the new world out there, and how can I, be of service to them and be present for their needs. So in today's conversations, we're hoping to hear some beautiful stories and words of wisdom as our guest speakers, and they talk about what their life's been like and what they see in the future, and how coaching is the preferred individual and organization tool, development tool, and can lead the change in the future to support them and their stakeholders and each of us viewers in our life and organization journeys. So ladies and gentlemen, I take a deep breath, and it gives me great pleasure to have on the spotlight with me here, Mukund Rajan, who is our first panelist. Dr. Mukund Rajan is the chairman of eCube Investment Advisors, a first of its kind platform created in 2019 to catalyze environment, social, and governance changes in corporate India. Prior to this, he held a number of senior executive positions through his 23-year career with the Tata Group, where he served as the first brand custodian of the Tata Group, Chief Ethics Officer of the group, Chairman of the Tata Global Sustainability Council, and member of the Group Executive Council at Tata Sons. An author of 2 books already, His third book on corporate responsibility and ESG is titled as Outlast: How ESG Can Benefit Your Business. Co-authored with Dr. Colonel Rajiv Kumar, has recently been published by HarperCollins. I also invite on the spotlight Sarita Behel, who's going to be engaging with him in this conversation. Sarita is an ACC credential coach from ICF and specializes in career transition coaching. To lead the conversation with him, Sarita and Mukund, over to you.
Thank you, Priya. Mukund, I think we already had a start into sustainability and climate issues with Masoom, talking about penguins and the water that we see around us now. So
correct.
I think a good beginning for you. But always a pleasure to be with you, Mukund, and I still remain curious as to how do you straddle these different worlds of academia, research, corporate, such diverse interests. How do you really do this?
Well, thanks for asking me that question. So I guess you're referring to the books I've written. But let me sort of take you back to the first book I wrote, which was published in 1996. And this was actually based on my doctoral dissertation at Oxford University. And at Oxford, one of the things I learned, which was sort of constantly drilled into our heads by our professors and tutors, was you have an obligation to put out your knowledge to the community, to the public at large. Don't keep knowledge to yourself. And particularly as a doctoral research student, where you're doing some original research, you have an obligation to communicate as best as you can what you've learned to the rest of the world. So my first book was really an effort to translate my dissertation into a easily accessible book that people could read. It was on global environmental politics, and Oxford University Press published that. Fast forward many years later, when I left the Tatas, I wrote my second book called The Brand Custodian, My Years with the Tatas. And this is really an effort to capture my memories of what it was like working with India's largest corporate house through a period of great change, the 1990s, the 2000s, and subsequently. And I wanted to do this before memory started failing me. And so that was the second book. And the third, the most recent one, was something I really wrote during the COVID lockdown, the first lockdown, and was really an effort to package all the information, the learning, the understanding that I was getting, a lot of my past experience with the Tatas and some of the work we've done recently at eCube on the ESG transition at corporate India. And in the book, I say that perhaps this transition is going to be as transformational and impactful as the 1991 economic reforms. And I felt this is something that I was sort of seeing so clearly. I felt I had to simply put it out and communicate it to the rest of the world. So really, if you can marry your interest with your work, I think that's a fantastic sort of convergence. I've been very, very fortunate to be able to do that. And that's why I keep doing this.
This is one marriage that will have no divorce, right?
I hope so.
So, now you become a pioneer in the environment, social governance, the ESG space. And I think the buzzword is sustainability. I would say the 21-22 buzzword has suddenly become sustainability. So, is there any turning point that happened, during when you became convinced that this was the right move for me to make, to go to ESG? It wouldn't have happened overnight, right? Something must.
Correct.
Can you share that with us, please?
So let me maybe split that into two parts. One is just the focus on ESG and sustainability. And the second is the decision to set up my own firm with some of my erstwhile colleagues from the Tatas and create a new company focused entirely on this space. So the entrepreneurial journey. So on the first one, as I mentioned, way back, my master's and doctorate at Oxford were on the politics of the environment. And one saw many of these issues coming. The issue of climate change has been there since the late 80s. So one was already sort of familiar with the subject. But I think my years in the Tatas, when I was chairing the Sustainability Council, one critical turning point was, in fact, in 2016, when Norges Bank, which manages the Norwegian sovereign wealth, and they were a significant investor in one of our companies, Tata Power, decided overnight to decarbonize their portfolio. So they started pulling their investments in companies that had a large exposure on coal, particularly as one of the fossil fuels responsible for global warming. And overnight, they sold their position in Tata Power. That to us in the Tatas, and for me personally as the chair of the Sustainability Council, was one turning point which showed how quickly this agenda is taking root and how investors, particularly overseas, making important decisions on supporting companies based on what they're seeing in the whole sustainability agenda. So that was, I think, one very important turning point. It showed that the time is now and it has come. On the entrepreneurial journey, I think two factors were turning points. One is, of course, the fact that my wife has been an entrepreneur for years before me, almost a decade plus. She runs one of India's most successful wealth advisory firms. And she was sort of an inspiration for me to see that leaving the umbrella of a large, well-organized, in her case, bank, in my case, the Tata Group, you could actually pursue your individual ambitions and do something very successful, take the risk. So that was inspirational for me. But perhaps in 2017, again, when I was in Tata's, there was another event which was a turning point in my career. I used to be quite involved with the Tata's telecom strategy. And in 2017, the group suddenly announced that they were probably going to look at closing down the telecom operations. A number of my erstwhile colleagues from the telecom business then approached me and said, is there something we can do to rescue the business? So after a fair amount of evaluation, we identified the broadband networks that Tata Teleservices owns and manages across the country. By the way, these are the networks that are probably responsible for the calls we're doing right now over video chat. The throughput of data and video on these networks is all important now in the COVID period. So we looked at that business and we decided we'd actually make an offer for a management buyout. And in essentially a month, we crafted an offer for over $1.3 billion, supported by the private equity fund TPG and a Canadian pension fund. And the fact that we were able to put together an offer in such a short time, such a large offer, convinced me that now in India, if you have the right idea and you have a strong team to work with you, you can get capital to really pursue your dreams. And that, I think, encouraged me that it was the right time to think about moving on and doing stuff that I really enjoyed in, of course, the ESG and sustainability space. So those would be, I think, two of the important turning points in my life.
I just love the thought of your wife being the pivot around which you looked at entrepreneurship. And I think someday we must bring her, Priya, to our forum to hear about how she went about it. But what you said about your investors took me back to a decade ago when an Indian mining conglomerate, they had to pull out of future plans because the London investors backed out. Hearing about their investability, sustainability, sort of non-sustainability plans that were there. But since then and to now, what do you see are the critical challenges for ESG in India? Because India is a very different ball game altogether.
Sure. So I'd say the first, obviously, most important challenge is just creating the awareness that this is coming at us thick and fast. If you look overseas, take the UK, for instance, from next year, every listed company in the United Kingdom has to create a net zero transition plan to show how they are preparing for the climate change crisis. There is the European Union, which has put in place the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which will kick in from next year, which means that in due course, companies like the ones in India that are exporting to the European Union may potentially get levied with additional tariffs if they're not seen to be doing enough on the climate change agenda. Those kinds of initiatives, regulatory interventions overseas are becoming very big. I mentioned investors now making calls on decarbonizing the portfolios. So Indian companies that don't keep pace, I think, at grave risk of being left behind or potentially being disinvested from, particularly by overseas investors. So the first and most important requirement is, I think, greater awareness, education, training, and understanding of this agenda. The second important issue, I think, will be locating governance within companies. Too often in the past, these kinds of issues have been sort of subordinated, moved to the periphery. In some companies, it gets combined with CSR activity. It's not necessarily part of the mainstream strategy of the company. It doesn't find a lot of discussion at the level of the top management or in the board. I think all of that now has to change. And some of the best companies like Infosys, Airtel, have all created ESG committees of the board. So starting at the very highest levels, there is a discussion that's now going on the subject. You need to see much more of that across corporate India. The third point I'd make is research and development investments. That's been the Achilles heel of Indian industry for the longest time. As a nation, we probably spend somewhere in the region of 0.7% of our GDP on R&D and innovation. The large, well-developed countries like China are spending 3 times, 4 times that amount And that too in cases like China and the United States on a much larger GDP base. So we've got a long way to go to catch up. If we're not ahead of the curve, our companies again are at risk of being left behind. Fourth and finally, particularly for the small and medium enterprises, I'd say the biggest challenge is going to be access to technology and financing. And in financing, I think sustainable finance is now becoming a thematic that the banks and NBFCs are beginning to focus on. But too little so far has happened, and there's too little financing available. Climate Policy Initiative put out a study last year, just before the Glasgow Climate Conference, which suggested that India in this decade on climate alone requires something like $170 to $200 billion a year of investment. And what is actually happening currently is $17 to $18 billion a year. So 10% of what we need. So if you think about the trillions of dollars we will need between now and 2035, very little of that at the moment is coming into the market. So that's going to be, again, I think, a big challenge. Hopefully, with the kind of awareness that expands, I think understanding that now the government is beginning to show this year in the budget for the first time, they talked about a sovereign green bond offering. This will start to change. But right now, I see it as a major handicap for Indian companies that want to make the climate and the sustainability transition.
You're going to have your hands full with so many challenges that you have listed.
But opportunity as well. Every challenge comes with the opportunity.
Yeah, I want to pick up on the first challenge that you mentioned, training and awareness. So I see that need, and right from the top CEOs. I know many CEOs who are not convinced about ESG and the need for sustainability as a commercial strategic part of their business. And then, of course, you have teams and you have individual people, because the hiring in sustainability will also substantially go up once this picks up steam. I will leave the GDP part for Manoj to pick up, because I know he can counter you on the kind of low GDP we have for healthcare in India. But when you see a training and awareness, how do you see coaching acting as one of those enabling development tools that can, make people more empowered and, conscious, and they take a deep dive within themselves to see how they can further their own potentials to work in this area?
Oh, I think it can be exceedingly important. In fact, just to mention, the name of my company, EQ, was actually crafted from the 3 E's: engage and empower for ESG. And just as you do in coaching, we felt that we need to have conversations with industry leaders or top executives in order to facilitate this transformation and transition that we need to see in India. So I think many corporate leaders, challenges they face include a lot of short-termism in the market, need to be responsive to shareholder expectations quarter on quarter. A lot of the agenda that we are talking about is quite long-term. Think about net zero plans that companies have announced. Unilever has announced net zero by 2039. So it's a plan for 17 years from now. It's not a plan for tomorrow or the day after. So it takes great courage of conviction, and it takes strong leadership at the top to make such long-term plans and be able to explain it to your stakeholder base. So I think you have to start with education. You need to take people into confidence, give them a sense of what the future looks like, and then carry them with you. I think that is possible if you at least explain to them why this matters to the business, why this matters to their future success. I think it starts with that. And then as people get more interested in these conversations, we start looking out for the low-hanging fruit. And there are lots of low-hanging fruit. Too often we equate ESG with only environment and having to spend capital. But don't forget the fact that the S of ESG, social, improving diversity indicators, for instance, doesn't cost any money. Look at energy efficiency. A lot of energy efficiency investments actually create savings and a better bottom line for the company. So I think there are ways in which you can construct that conversation, take it forward, to persuade people that they have a vested interest in doing some of this stuff quickly. And then the long-term stuff, as long as they understand what it means and how it can be executed, they can start putting strategies in place and then explain it to the markets. I think the markets now increasingly are putting that pressure in any case. So I think you'll have naysayers declining in numbers. But the sad truth is that the ones that take too long are at risk of being excluded from markets, of being at risk of being excluded in terms of access to equity or debt capital, and are at risk of essentially vanishing from supply chains of the larger companies that are now demanding this from all value chain partners.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think that's a great perspective. And I can see Priya looking at me, how do we as ICF Mumbai chapter now associate with this whole field and bring in coaching and be a critical partner with you ahead in the future. Well, thank you very much for your time, Mukund. I know we have other great stellar speakers over here. Please stay with us because
Absolutely. Looking forward to those conversations. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mukund and Sarita. That was wonderful. How insightful, Mukund, all of what you said, especially your E-Cube. Just amazed with that. We will have conversations separately. And with that, I want to switch the spotlight to our next panelists, who is Urvashi Devi Dayal, who is the Sankalp Forum lead at IntelliCap. She has worked across the global development sector in the US, UK, and India on sectors ranging from climate change to human trafficking. In her career, she has worked with international development NGOs, large corporate foundations, and the private sector, focusing on CEO level advocacy programs, program management, and curating large-scale convening platforms. Leading the conversation with Urvashi today is our member coach, Prasad Pallav, who is an ACC credentialed coach from ICF, and he specializes in leadership and career coaching. Over to you, Urvashi and Prasad.
Thank you. Thank you, Priya. Thank you so much. Hi, Urvashi.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us. Urvashi, I was just listening to your bio. I read about you. And I think the amount of diversity in your career is just amazing. That's something that I noticed. How did you came from such a diversity, and how did you decide to move, starting your own startup? I mean, definitely like to hear that story.
Sure, I mean, I can definitely sort of tell you a little bit about my career, and thank you to the ICF chapter for having me here. This is truly an honor. When I started off my career, and I'm born and brought up in Bombay, and I studied in the US, and I always wanted to work in the development sector, but the choices at that time were very few. You could either work for an NGO, or the UN system at that point was quite inaccessible. But just as Mukund was talking about sort of how there is more sort of corporate accountability, etc., the options change. So I actually did have a small startup at one point, but I've actually had a very stellar career with international NGOs. So I worked with the climate group. I actually managed to work on climate change from 2007 to 2012, when nobody even knew that it was a thing to work on. I worked with the Thomson Reuters Foundation for about 5 years, working on legal policies and legal challenges, with a very, very strong focus on human trafficking and modern day slavery. And now I work for IntelliCap, which is a development consultancy with a strong focus on impact investing and entrepreneurship. So very pleased to see the sort of the development ecosystem has changed, and the career options have changed from what they were sort of when I graduated from college many, many years ago.
Thank you for giving that quick snapshot. Now that you have your own startup, how are you imagining the startups for the future, especially after this pandemic, when in this hyper-connected world, where it's become industry agnostic, right? How do you reimagine this future, especially for women entrepreneurs as well as the men? How would you want to reimagine that?
Sure. Just a quick correction. I don't actually have my own startup now. I work for now, which is a very fairly big organization called the Avishkar Group. I think it has a little bit of $1 billion plus assets under management. But what I do run is Sankalp Forum, which is an ecosystem convener in this space. So what we do is we convene impact entrepreneurs, impact investors, corporates, private sector, governments, etc. And what we've been actually understanding about sort of the future of startups going forward is obviously that they will be virtual and borderless, right? So I mean that's a no-brainer. The virtual component of every startup is going to be something that every organization is going to have to take into account. But that also allows for a lot more inclusivity, right? So more women can work. I know we have a great entrepreneur, just a couple of panelists down, who actually started her own business in this pandemic. We can also sort of hire from tier 2, tier 3 cities where maybe, sort of connectivity wasn't that Either they had to come to the big cities to work in startups, but now we can actually hire from anywhere. We can hire from any country. We can hire with people with disabilities. So hopefully inclusivity is going to sort of change a lot. I think, sort of linking back to what Mukund was talking about ESG, is that a lot more startups are going to have to start being impact oriented from the start. So impact or sustainability or social governance cannot be an afterthought. It's going to have to be baked into your plans right from the start. So you have to look at sort of how business and society are interlinked. And you can't think of, just revenue and just profit. It's just not going to work. In the next 10 years, every business is going to have to be accountable. It's not just the big corporates which will have sort of ESG ratings, etc., to take care of. So I think this is really the change that we're seeing. And then I think the one other thing that, I feel we've been seeing with the number of the startups that we are, in touch with, and obviously in our own organizations, is that organization hierarchies change. So cultures are changing a lot. To build an organization culture is very tough. I'm still trying to figure out where the corner office in a Zoom call is. And that doesn't exist. So it is much harder to sort of build corporate culture, to engage people, to sort of interact with teams. So so I think startups have an interesting challenge on the hands, lots of opportunities, lots of challenges, and a lot of learning on the ground.
This is something which even I have experienced while I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs who have their own startups, and that's one question which I have, which even I want to ask you is, what is that mindset which you would advise for people who want to have their own startups? What kind of mindset one has to be ready with?
Yeah, I would really say is that they really need to think about what the purpose of their startup is, right? Are you trying to solve a challenge? Are you trying to provide a service? What is that pain point that you are really trying to sort of solve for? If the objective when you start up is that, I want to be on Shark Tank, which is not a bad objective, it could sort of really scale your business. But if you start up by saying, I want to be a unicorn and I want to exit, and, I want to start up this, this enterprise, and in 2 years, I want to sell it to Sequoia and, have exits, multi-billion-dollar exits, that's not going to get you anywhere. You just really need to think about the purpose of what you have. And yes, I do come from, the development sector. So people tend to think that when I say purpose, I think very sort of socially oriented, which is true. You do need to think about that. But, if you don't have that in place, I don't think you're going to be able to sort of really build organization. So I would say that's the message in mind. And I think one other thing that I did want to also sort of talk about was really think beyond just the tech startups and the crypto startups. We live in a country which is still very, very poor. There is a big digital divide. So yes, we are all connected on Zoom calls and we are all doing these things, but there is an entire ecosystem of people beyond us who need products and services, and we need to build startups that actually are building with and for them also. So as a country, I would really sort of encourage that in a sense.
Yeah. So what I'm basically hearing is have a wider perspective, have a holistic perspective. Don't just go for one or two kind of industries or specialities. Try and diversify, as much as possible. And the other thing that I'm hearing from you is have that attitude of giving. What value are you adding to the society? I think that's the message that you're trying to say. How do you add? How do you give back? And that's the long-term game, and not just trying to do something, gain something, and then quit. Right? Sorry. Urushi, while we have been talking about what mindset, these startups need to have, or the people who want to get into this, how does coaching, in all of this, and I know you have been coached in the past, how do you think this element actually will help people who want to get into startups or want to have their own startups? How has that role played for you specifically?
Yeah, No, thank you for that. And I mean, I'm happy to share my experience with coaching. So I've had like two coaches in my career, and one was when I was in business school, and it was sort of, I think you reach a point where you're thinking only career, 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 and the coach was very good with actually saying it's career plus life, and to really think through sort of how your personal life intersects with your professional life. And I think that was something that you don't often think about. And I would say as a woman also, it is even more important. We have to think through pregnancy and biological clocks, and there are some limitations which are, well, I don't want to say limitations, because I mean, you can have a child whenever you want, but there are the biological aspects to your life that you have to think about, and you have to sort of merge that with what your professional goals are also. So even when you are having a startup, you need to think through these things. You can do as much as you want to do, but I think that intersection has to be thought through and done very sort of delicately. I think the other point where coaches have sort of really helped is really when you head from being a doer in a company to a leadership position. There's that pivot that has to happen from doing yourself to getting other people to do, which I'm sure everyone has had to deal with, and I'm sure I can learn from all of you all on this call a lot more. But I think that's that's the space where a coach has really sort of helped in that sense.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think that's one of the most important stuff as you move from a doer to somebody who is very strategic and somebody who has to start showing a vision to someone. That shift is not easy, and I think that's where coaching can really help you take yourself, shift certain beliefs, certain assumptions, and move forward. Thank you so much, Urvashi, for sharing your perspective. It has been wonderful talking to you. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Prasad and Urvashi. This was delightful. I'm going to move very rapidly into our next because we're kind of running behind on time. Appreciate that we crunch in our questions a little bit more. Manoj Saxena, the man at the moment here, is currently the managing director, Bayer Zydus Pharma and country division head, South Asia Pharmaceuticals. As part of Bayer's Asia Pacific Pharma leadership team, he is known for his contribution in driving key growth strategies within the region. With a deep understanding of the healthcare industry, he has immense experience across functions and has taken on senior roles in sales and marketing, business analysis, and general management. Manoj is passionate about inclusion and diversity. He is also the sponsor of the Infinite US, the inclusion and diversity community at Bayer in India, and represents the I&D Council of Bayer Pharma globally. And who better than Coach Shripad Ranade himself to lead the conversation with. Shripad has an ACC credential from ICF, and he specializes in leadership coaching and is a management consultant, helping people and organizations achieve their true potential. I'm going to have you continue the conversation, Shripad, and Manoj, over to you.
Thank you so much, Priya. And Manoj, an absolute pleasure for us to have you here. And I'm going to start right at the top, because from your vantage point, you lead a large pharma business here in South Asia. From your vantage point, we are really curious to know how you look at the future of healthcare. And healthcare has suddenly become far more important for all of us over the last 2 years, and seems like it shall remain as important going forward. But specifically, we also want to know, given India's unique culture, the complexities that you see here, would the future of healthcare be different for India as to the rest of the world?
First of all, thank you for having me, Shripad. It's an honor to be here. You are right. I think that the biggest trend is that the healthcare is at the center of everything, and we have lived through this for 2 years now with COVID. But I think moving forward, healthcare and the importance people are going to give towards keeping their health in a better shape, that trends would continue, I hope. Yeah. And related to that is towards India, where we know India is one of the countries which spends one of the lowest amount of percentage GDP. If you look at Central and and I know Mukund had that conversation as well. State and central allocation towards health is actually just 1.3% of GDP. Yeah, and if you look at BRICS country, it's over 3%. OECD, of course, it is close to 8%. So I guess one of the trends would be, and that's also in our national health mission policy, that over a period of time, the health allocation and the spend, both private play, but also the government public play would significantly increase. So that is one trend. I guess people are going to focus more on their health, their well-being, and gradually, the old age saying of health is wealth would change to wealth is health. Yeah, and I think that would be good for everyone. The second is, which is also partly what we have seen in other developed countries or seeing across the globe, is the whole demographic shift. Yeah, as life expectancy is getting better with more innovative medications over the last, half century or so, people are living longer. Yeah, so you are seeing more chronic ailments. India is very similar, almost 200 million people would be, by 2030, would be over the age of 65. Now, how do we take care of those people? I think so demographic shift and the sort of disease which would, which is mostly lifestyle disease would come in. Yeah. Consumers are going to get more aware, and I always say that we, as a pharma company, as healthcare stakeholder, we always put patients at the center of everything, right? We want the patients to feel empowered, understand what they are going through, and help in them managing it very well. So I guess we would see more empowered patients. Yeah, people who are trying to read more, trying to understand more, trying to be at the driver's seat in terms of managing their healthcare. Will it happen overnight? Of course not. But I think that also is a mega trend for which I look at it. And lastly, I think we have all seen the importance which digital, the technology, the health tech has played over the last 2 years. And I'm sure that's not going to reverse. So the whole shift towards digitalization, in some manner to facilitate greater access, towards healthcare would continue. So those are the 3-4 mega trends. And on some fronts, India's complexity, we always say India is two. Actually, from my perspective, India is three. There is urban India, where the healthcare facilities is more or less, we see medical tourism happening, so at par with any other big cities. Then there is semi-urban, which could be pockets of Bombay, pockets of Delhi, which are essentially urban areas, but still the healthcare is pretty primitive or lacking essential. And then there is rural India. And I'm sure in all those, India is going to, it's a huge opportunity for everyone as a stakeholder. So, and I think that's where India would certainly grow. So that complexity of India is an opportunity. And I hope the investment goes there as well in building infrastructure and the capabilities there.
And you spoke very pointedly about digitization separately from digitalization. I heard that. And while we speak about digitization in healthcare, we speak about medical records. That's usually what one has been speaking about the last 15 years in healthcare. But as we go to true digitalization and therefore go to AI, and AI playing a part in the overall patient experience cycle, there is some concern in some quarters that the relationship between the patient and the healthcare provider could change in the future, that in some way we will lose the human touch. And those of us who are here today, we are looking to reimagine the future. We are wondering whether this is the future that we want, and there's something we should be doing today so that we do not lose that human touch. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, see, whenever we change or adapt to a new platform, whether it's a technological platform or otherwise, there is always an old school which says it will take away something, right? And in this case is a human touch. Yeah, but we also have seen the benefits of digitalization, beyond just the digitization of the health records over the last 2 years. Yeah, people who are unable to travel have reached out to their doctors remotely. And of course, in some cases where the physical need is there to see the patient, I'm sure those doctors have asked the patients to travel. So digitalization would be a sweet spot in terms of giving options, and today when we look at, we are not looking at just life. I think everybody is focused on quality of life. And in that quality of life, giving options to a patient, but also to a healthcare practitioner, also to other healthcare participants is absolutely critical. And what does technology provides is an option which is giving to the patients. Yeah. But digitization in the healthcare is not just limited to between doctors and patient, right? So in that sense, where, I think as the frost settles over the COVID times, you will see that a lot of patients are back to the hospital, and doctors also see what is the right mix and the sweet spot. But the digitalization is happening across the board. We would become more innovative. Yeah, the access to a good quality doctor, which otherwise will not be able, so because the doctor was not traveling to a remote village in India, through telemedicine, telehealth would go. The internet of technology, the devices in health tech, the data analytics which help a patient to understand its disease better. Yeah. So all that, I think digitalization offers a mechanism where patient at the end and the clinician who's treating are better informed. And it offers an option where doctor feels, is it a follow-up visit? Do I really need to see a patient? So while the concerns are valid, and I think, but from my understanding, digitalization is giving an option to both the doctor and the patient, and it is bringing more efficiencies in the system and removing the inefficiency which have been crept in. Yeah.
And when you speak about this, I hear about how things are changing, and perhaps things have changed for most of us in very different ways and to a greater extent in the last 2 years than for several years before. So if I take a broader canvas and we move on from healthcare to your role as a business leader, what has been your experience with the change priorities for people, for businesses? How do you think over the last 2 years and going forward, as business leaders, there has been a lot of adapting. So can you share a little bit with us about how you as a business have adapted and what's happening tomorrow?
Yeah. Shripad, in all our educational days or various training programs, yeah, we all learn about how do you manage a crisis, yeah, and what sort of leadership you would demonstrate during a crisis. And what stuck in everybody's mind is this emotional intelligence, right? What are the conduits of it, and how do you? And 2 years were actually that period of time where every leader went back and looked at it. What do we mean by emotional intelligence now? Yeah, and three things, 3 or 4 things which are critical at this period of time is, as you say, adaptive leadership is how do you communicate to the organization, and what do you communicate? How do you prioritize, right? And at Bayer, for example, we prioritize essentially during the early stage of COVID, when everybody was trying to understand is that the health and safety for employees, their families is absolutely paramount. Yeah, we can't really do anything else without looking at the health and safety. So I think, how do you adapt as a leader to prioritize and set clarity based on whatever anticipation you can anticipate and think on what is going to happen. Yeah, so prioritizing health was an important perspective in Second was, having empathy, yeah, and able to articulate that and communicate that, within your organization, yeah, which is also extremely important. How do you communicate while having full empathy as to what is going through? Yeah, and last thing is how do you adapt to various changes in terms of how do you work in a new setting? How much are you transparent to the environment, what is going through, and being honest. Sometimes you don't really know what is the answer to many things, right? And leadership also demands you to be brutally honest with your colleagues and with your teams, that we don't have all the answers as we try to resolve and pass through this crisis phase. So I think those were the things which which I reflect back and think on, helped me and also the organizational other leaders to be agile and adaptive in a time phase where we had not every answers to the problems which we were looking at.
And that brings me actually to this entire set of words that you used, ranging from emotional intelligence to humility and honesty to adaptability. If I may add to that, things like resilience or agility, which are facets of those. And when you look at these and you look at the role of coaching as a self-development and inside-out development tool for managers and leaders, what's been your experience with coaching, and what would you advise those who are in the audience who are really wondering whether coaching is for them today as they go up the corporate ladder, so to speak?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think this is a very, very important question. You know, a lot of people, including myself, in the early part of the corporate life, think that, oh, coaching is not for us. We know everything. Yeah. If somebody says you are not self-aware, I've said, no, I know everything almost. Yeah. So it's a bit of stigma if a senior leader asks for a coach. Yeah. Or a senior leader is advised, you know, as someone who is starting the journey, or who is someone who is at the top. Yeah. Everybody in the corporate life needs a coach. I guess, you know, sometimes we look at coach comes to give a remedial solution on a skill set. I don't think that's the right way of looking at coach actually enhances your performance. Yeah. And which is the same way that happens in any sport. If number one tennis player, you know, Djokovic goes along with the coach in a court, nobody questions. But if a top CEO goes into a meeting along with the coach, it is being questioned. So I get that stigma, at least from the audience, if they can look at it, is not. And when we look at, you know, what are the skill sets you need at a senior level to a junior level, you know, three things comes out clearly, that if you are a senior business leader, you have to be good in, you know, communication, you have to be good in collaboration, and you have to be good in coaching. So if you have to be a good coach yourself in your, you know, as a mid-level manager, as a senior level manager, how would you unless until you understand it? Yeah. And how coaching works for you. So, and I've been, you know, fortunate enough to get coach early on. Coaching, as well as the other side of the coin, is mentoring. I am a big advocate of both of them, and it really benefits a lot in terms of understanding your own blind spot and enhancing your own performance. Yeah.
Thank you, Manoj. It's been a pleasure, and we are carrying away the message that everybody needs a coach. So Priya, back to you.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that, Manoj. That was so valuable to us as a community. Also, to know that you endorse coaching and you've embraced it early on in your career and continue to do so.
Thank
So
you,
our
Priya.
next spotlight is a lady I have admired from the longest time, since I was a little child, and to date, Mrs. Mira Isaacs. Mrs. Isaacs is a Master in Arts and a B.Ed. She has been associated with the Cathedral and John Connon School for the past 41 years, out of which 21 and a half years has been spent as the head of the school. She's the first lady principal of this 158-year-old institution and the first internal promotion as principal. In very simple terms, Mrs. Isaacs' credo as an educationist is to put the child at the focus, as the focus of all education activities, so that they may grow into an assured and confident person who is able to evolve strategies and skills to deal with ever-changing environments. If they are able to do this, it naturally follows that the joy of life will be theirs. How beautiful, Mrs. Isaacs. Our member coach, Tushima Mukherjee, will lead the conversation with Mrs. Isaacs. Tushima has an ACC credential from ICF, and she specializes in executive coaching and assessments. The spotlight is over to you, Tushima and Mrs. Isaacs.
Thank you so much, Priya. Mrs. Isaacs, you, if I can put it this way, are an institution yourself. It's so nice to be talking to you. We spoke on the phone last week, and I'm so delighted to finally be able to see you and interact with you in this forum. So welcome, and thank you for taking the time out to speak with us today.
Thank you so much, Tushima, and thank you, Priya. Thank you for inviting me here. I must say, all the previous speakers whom I was listening to very carefully, they are very, very inspiring, I must say. Lots of wonderful lessons that one can learn.
So I'm going to start by asking you this, Mrs. Isaacs, as somebody who has spent 4 decades in the education sector, my first question to you would be, what according to you is the current state of education, and what would you say the future holds?
Well, let me just say one thing, that somebody before me, I think it was Manoj who said that the patient is at the center of everything that this particular segment looks at. And I think that's very, very true of education, that the child is the center of whatever we do. And as I was telling you, I think no matter when, whether it was earlier or whether it's in the future, I think the learning experience must be a joy. Right? I think we've come a long way from the time when we start, say I'm looking at my journey, and I think we have come a long way. We've added a lot of things to make it more telling, to make it more giving, more nurturing, etc., etc. But I think there's much more that one has to do. And when I look at the future, especially when we see what happened during the last 2 years, I can see a huge, it's almost like a seismic shift. What one would have been a little wary, really, of putting almost at the center of things is now coming almost there. For example, the digital world. We look, at least I have looked at the digital world with a little bit of suspicion earlier, because we see the pros and the cons, and I think all of us are aware of that. But yes, it certainly has a lot to give. But you ask me, what is the future? The future is so uncertain. We really don't know what the future holds for our children, because everything has changed so rapidly and so wildly, I may say. I mean, earlier there was a sort of a placidity to the entire thing. You knew you had to do this and do that and get your degree or whatever. I don't think that's the case at all nowadays. I think there is so much out there, and so much that children can do, and so much that young people can do. I mean, even the people, all the other panelists before me, I think I'm the only one who is stuck in the same, along the same beaten path all my life. But everybody else seems to have changed and shifted and moved to different areas and gained a great deal out of it. You see, both in terms of what they have learned for themselves and what they'll be able to give to society. And I think that is where the future is. That is where the world is going. So everything is very, very uncertain. But while it is uncertain, I think it also promises a great deal.
Thank you, Mrs. Isaacs. That was a very authentic response when you say that everything is very uncertain. I know that I do, and many of us also share in that same feeling of uncertainty, because we've all been affected by this seismic shift, as you put it, in the past 2 years. And we've also seen so many people around us grapple with the same kind of skepticism around shifting from the in-person to the digital ways of working. So I can definitely relate to what you're saying. What, according to you, would it take to still keep that focus on nurturing, serving, as well as adapt with all the change and the uncertainty that seems to be surrounding us, especially in your sector, in the education sector, for children, for teachers?
I think we can't ever stop learning. We have to continuously learn if we are to do the best that we can in this field. And we are very lucky, really, very fortunate to be dealing with children, because I think there's a great deal of magic in dealing with children. And I honestly feel that if there are the school and the home, these are the two places where, I mean, which is absolutely fundamental to the child. And when I see all the sort of things happening around, I realize that we as educators, as parents, as teachers, that we need to give our children the strength to cope and to deal with all that can be thrown at them. Because I mean, what we saw just over these 2 years, I think only heightened that awareness. And we need to, and also what we see around us even now. You know, it's all very different from the time when I was growing up, for example, which was a long time ago. But I think even when you were growing up, Kushima, or just a few years ago, I think we need to be able to teach our children that you have to be resilient. Everything is not going to fall into your lap. You will have to learn to adjust and to adapt, because adaptability is so important these days. While I was listening to the earlier speakers, all these things came flooding into my mind, because every single one spoke about climate. I mean many. We spoke about various things like climate change and EQ and the environment and the digital divide and the emotional intelligence. You know, all this is what we as educators need to be able to give our children. Give our children the fact that they must have the space for inclusion, for collaboration, for sharing, for critical thinking, and now also with what COVID has done to us, to be able to heal. Because there have been huge spaces where children have been totally bereft. They don't know what's been going on. So I think there's just so much more on the not just the social front, but also the emotional front and the mental front that our children need to learn. See, education in the sense that we know it can't be just information. It has to be knowledge, and knowledge that is going to take them from move them upwards and onwards. But at the same time, we cannot lose their sense of being human beings, of being people with a heart and a soul, being able to reach out to another person. Because here we saw the differences. We saw how lucky many of our children were, and we saw how very unfortunate so many other children were, and so many other people were. And I think this is what education really should be doing. Of course, one can always, book learning is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the learning that comes from the heart, the soul. Of course, we have to give our children the ability and the wherewithal to be able to get on in life, to get success, etc., etc. But success is nothing without all this everything else that goes along with it. And that, I think, is what makes us human beings. This atmosphere of hate, somehow, that I think we live in at the moment, is something that cannot be condoned. Our children should not be growing up in this kind of environment. It should be an environment where you can look ahead and see the beauty of human beings, see the beauty of the world, see the beauty of mankind. That is what it should be.
Thank you. That was so moving and so profound and spoken straight from the heart, I can tell, Mrs. Isaacs. And I completely agree with you. I mean, it's been 32 years since I left school, but I can till today feel how much of a foundational experience it was for me and how it has shaped me and my life and will continue to do that. And I'm deeply grateful to all the teachers that I've had for that. So the ask of educators, like you put it, is really staggering. So what is it that you think is required by educators, by teachers, to be able to really do this and create this kind of magic for the students?
I think we ourselves need to be more aware of what is happening in the world around us. Let me just give you a small example. When 26/11 happened, and that was a time of horror really for Mumbai, and in our school we lost 15 families were affected by this. where we lost people in 15 different families and in a horrendous fashion. And when we came back, the first 3 or 4 days of our coming back was just teaching our children, helping our teachers, helping I myself to learn how to deal with the situation. You see, so that unless we have an understanding, unless we are able to get some sort of closure from ourselves, we need help. All right, whether we go to mentoring or counseling or coaching or whatever it is, we need to see the path ahead and to know how to make that journey. Because unless we as teachers do that, unless we as the adults in the lives of these children do that, we're never going to be able to help our children along the way. And this is what I think is so important. And we learned a great deal in those few days where we had counselors coming in to talk to us literally the whole day long, and to help our children, to help us, so that we could all move again to a more, a safer, more gentle sort of place, instead of seeing the ghastliness that we all saw. And I don't mean to say that, I mean, I do see that there is a lot of all this happening in the world, but I do think that if we are able to get wise people helping all of us to help our children, we are going to be able to overcome even this. And I think that is really the need of the hour.
And where do you see coaching fitting into this scheme of things here?
So I would think that that is where coaching would come in, to help us to understand what is the journey ahead, to understand how to make that journey ahead, and to know that, all right, we can move ahead with grace and joy and magic really in our lives, and to so that it can be transformed into something so much bigger and better than what we consider mere success. You know, sometimes we just talk about success. Oh, this person is so successful. But do we also look underlying it all? Do we see, are they happy? What is happiness really? You know, I think these bigger questions need to be asked, especially in a world that just seems to be hurtling along in a rather uncharted sort of way. Of course, there are all these other wonderful things that are happening at the same time, but what happens to the individual? You know, and I don't think there's any need for us to have, things like, even now in our education system, we have, you have to do science, or you have to do commerce, and arts is something left behind. I don't think so. I think it's so important. And I think at the moment, Princeton, for example, is actually insisting that you must have 2 years of history before at the graduation at the high school level in order to come in to be a postgraduate. I think that's very good, because if you don't have that larger humanitarian outlook, I think you're bereft of something. And I also feel that this business of equating everything with marks is something that is so absolutely hideous. I know, as a principal of a school, I have done it. I myself am guilty of that. Parents are guilty of that. But why? Because we're all looking at some idea of success in the future. But like a child said the other day, a child who's going into college, that we have begun to see ourselves as extensions of our mark sheets. What a horrible thing. What an absolutely rotten thing. So I think we need to be able to see things in a more comprehensive, more holistic manner. What are we giving our children in the final analysis? And there, I think, is where what you are doing absolutely comes in. Help us to help our children, and help our children to help themselves.
What a fantastic message, Mrs. Isaacs. And just
Wow.
music to my ears, whatever
Yeah.
you said, especially because I'm an art student. So great. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you very, very much. Priya, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Mrs. Isaac. So wonderful to hear all your beautiful thoughts and really appreciate you making time to be here with us. Please stay on. We're going to come back to you. All right. The next guest for the evening is someone who really doesn't need a spotlight. He's so used to it, right? He's so special. Who is this person? Mr. Roshan Abbas, a man who's so familiar with the stage. There he is. And when he's been on stage since he was 4 years old and never stepped away from the spotlight. He's an entrepreneur, author, film and theater director, TV and radio host, a podcaster, producer, angel investor, but most of all, he's a storyteller. His vision for Commune is fascinating, considering it was clearly his brainchild. And I too had been part of that initial sessions, if you remember, Roshan, where we had those sessions where we would try and tell our stories in that rudimentary little story in studio in Warsaw, and then conceptualized a fantastic, unique identity called Spoken. It's a collective for great art and great artists. He attempts to shine the spotlight and provide a platform to others now by connecting people to opportunities. Roshan founded and led Encompass, now VMLY&R Commerce Encompass, as managing director, into becoming India's largest, most awarded experiential marketing agency. He is also the current president of EMA, which is the consortium of event management and entertainment company leaders of the country. To surmise, Roshan Abbas, in a phrase he says, very aptly put, he says, he's a storyteller and a story seller. Our member coach, Afshin Datubhai, will lead this conversation with Roshan. Afshin is an ACC credentialed coach from ICF, and she specializes in empowering individuals, building brands, and training teams by merging design thinking and coaching techniques with the power of the creative arts, gameplay, and storytelling. Over to you, Afshin and Roshan.
Thank you so much for that, Priya. And firstly, thank you, Roshan. I know you logged in while you were on a 16-hour journey, and
oh my God,
appreciate you doing that. So thank you. I loved the phrase storyteller and story seller. Tell us about the power of storytelling.
I think all of us, Afshin, thank you firstly for doing this, and Priya, as a very old friend, thank you for getting me on this. But I must also say that Mrs. Isaacs is somebody I'm very, very fond of. She had taken on one. I come up with these mad ideas, and sometimes I find people who believe in the crazy. So she once accepted a play that I actually wrote for the school and directed with the kids and and conceptualized. So seeing her was such a pleasure, and hearing everyone else was so wonderful. I really feel that she is amongst the best in the education, and I won't call it business, but I think in the business of inspiring people with education. So thank you so much, ma'am, for that. What you asked about saying, the importance of stories, I think, see, if you look at life for all of us, life, if I asked you to go back and look at your own life, there would be certain highlights that you want to talk of or lowlights that you want to talk of. And how do you communicate these? Do you communicate these in facts and figures? Facts and figures are do not have connectivity. They do not have stickiness. If you convert that same fact and figure into a story, stories transmit. We have, as human beings, the thing that is written by Noah Yuval Harris in his book. He says very clearly that, the thing that differentiates human beings from everyone is the ability to tell stories. Is the ability that we can tell stories, we transmit information through stories, and stories are the easiest way of putting a message out there. So, when you saw something on a cave wall which said there's a fire, and then you see a big animal which is running away, you were communicating through a story saying, hey, listen, there's a lot of dangerous things out there, but if you light a fire, you might be safe. So I think stories are just an extremely wonderful way of giving data context and giving it a lot more meaning in life.
That's amazing. Thank you. It's so funny because I call myself a creative life and executive coach. And the reason I do that is because we use storytelling, especially with teams. We use storytelling in the form of drama and art, drama and role play, art and sketchnoting. And it really helps you. It helps you connect on a different level. It helps you be empathetic. It helps you get so much more clarity, get new perspectives. So I really appreciated your, the way you described it using imagery and the difference between data and storytelling. So thank you for that. Tell us, I know you clearly are a visionary. You, as Priya was saying, you started Commune, Spoken, before we realized that we as individuals, not celebrities, not renowned intellectual thought leaders, we as individuals have a story to tell. And it really feels like you are such a visionary. So I'm going to tap into this foresight that you have and ask you, in this changing world, where do you see the media and the entertainment industry? Where do you see it going?
So, if you had a couple of hours, I would take this question on because, frankly, this is one of my pet subjects to talk on. We are currently noticing what I call the second renaissance, as it was. When the first renaissance happened, if you remember, what actually took place was that there was a lot of exchange of information that was taking place between Europe and the Middle East. And there used to be a trade route that was controlled by a compass that was looking at the stars. Now, when you could only look at the stars during the summer months, you couldn't see them in any of the other months. And when they discovered the magnetic compass, the amount of exchange, the number of trips that started happening became 4 times. And when the number of trips between different countries, different civilizations became 4x, the information exchange, the stories that were exchanged, the ideas that were exchanged, all of that actually became the base for the Renaissance. Now, if you look at what's happening digitally today, we are in what's called Web 3.0. Now, what is Web 1 or Web 2, Web 3? Web 3 is very simply a place where there is two-way communication and the democratization of every tool of content. Today, if you, Afshin, wanted to make a film, all you need is a mobile phone and maybe a couple of collaborators. Gone are the days of having to buy equipment that cost crores. Gone are the days of looking for locations. I've seen people in small villages across the world, because I browse a lot of what happens internationally on TikTok or in India on Moj and many of the other channels, Josh, etc. And if you see short form content and what youngsters are doing with it, it is them having the tools available. There is no filter, and so they create what they want to create. Now, this was earlier controlled by platforms in Web 2.0. So whatever you did went on to a particular platform. And the day the platform decided to put you off the platform, you were over. Millions and millions of creators in India, the day TikTok died, were like, what do we do next? But what Web 3.0 is doing is that it is giving you the ability to own, control, and monetize your own audience. So tomorrow, if Afshin has 100 students who she connects with and she tells them, you know what, get me 5 more people, everybody, and I'm going to charge X and you can pay me via Paytm, everything. There is no friction. So we are going to see the future where there are going to be millions of creators and creators who will populate either at the top end. What is the lowest common denominator? The lowest common denominator is entertainment. We want to laugh, we want to listen to music, and therefore comedy, dance, and music will remain at the top end, and cinema will remain at the top end as something that will be mass, and therefore it will throw up what we call supernovas, big stars. But at the lower end, there will be millions of creators, who will find niches. Somebody will teach you Kathak online, somebody will teach you how to write, somebody will teach you art the way you were talking of. So I genuinely believe that the creator economy is upon us. Globally, the creator economy is meant to be $50 billion at the moment. And India is only getting 21% of that, though we have 113 million creators who identify themselves as creators. 87% of young people say that they want to have a creative side hustle, right? So everybody in life is, and I think the pandemic played a very important role, because for 2 years, we could really look and say, I've got so much more time, what do I do with it? So either you were consuming, which everybody did, or you were creating. And that creativity, I think, really has hit its tipping point. So frankly, as I said, I can go on for hours with this.
Okay, I'm going to pick your brain a little more with this subject. So the creator economy, what do you think is the kind of thinking, the kind of mindset that you need to really thrive in this creator economy?
So in Stanford, there is this very interesting book which I read, which is called The Fuzzy and the Techie. Right? So everybody thinks they're a techie, and this is what Mrs. Isaacs was talking about as well, saying how many of us end up focusing on the technical skills or, or the skills that are the pure sciences. But frankly, what you require to be a part of this creator economy is to explore the fuzzy side. It was said by Jack Ma that the only people who will survive and have jobs in the world will be people who are creative thinkers. The reason is, and I don't want to be a doomsday, speak, or I don't want to be talking about, oh, all jobs will go to computers. No, jobs will go to computers and machine learning and AI, which will be jobs that are computable jobs. But what will happen on the other end is that fuzzy logic where 2 + 2 will not be equal to 4 on a particular day. Look at the kind of things that people are creating. Every time Christopher Nolan creates something new, you're like, oh my God, where did he think of this? Right? And you're saying, and what Steve Jobs said, that if I was creating what people wanted me to create, I would create products that would never surprise them. I have to look ahead and find things that they never thought of. So frankly, I think creators have to be part dreamers, part doers. If you're only a dreamer, you will end up becoming just a person who has castles in the sky. But frankly, be a doer. So have a doer mentality along with dreaming. Explore everything. I tell people, go on a creative date every week. Find something new. I don't understand Kathakali or Kuchipudi, but I will go and see a dance thing because it just stimulates the mind in a different manner. And the other thing is, get into the habit of putting what you feel out there. Every one of us is a creator. You're a writer. And you don't need to be writing, the words, don't need to be J.K. Rowling. You could just be yourself. But write 3 pages a day. I tell people that these 2 exercises, and they're not my exercises, they're in a beautiful book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. But it's an absolutely fantastic coaching book. And I'm going to coaching for that perspective, There are 2 people, Twyla Tharp and Julia Cameron, who I really worship in terms of the people who have put a process on the creator economy and how you can be creative. Again, Afshin, as you know, I could go on and on with these, so I'm very sorry.
That was amazing. By the way, I love the artist way. I've done the whole 12 weeks. It's phenomenal.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
Amazing. So tell us a little bit about you. And I feel like we both are clearly big Mrs. Isaacs fans. I'm a fellow student and very proud ex-cathedralite, and you've clearly worked with her. Tell us about who you were in high school.
I came from this place in Lucknow where, frankly, I went to an absolutely brilliant school called La Martinia. Mrs. Isaacs used to know the principal there as well, who was very dear to me, Mr. Elton D'Souza. And Elton actually unlocked in me creativity, frankly. While I had 2 parents, my 3rd parent was Elton D'Souza, who was my English teacher, my debating teacher, my dramatics teacher. And he actually, what I loved was, even today I tell people saying, when your teacher walks in and even pulls up a boy by quoting Shakespeare brilliantly, you're inspired. You're inspired to say, oh my God, out, brief candle could also mean, telling somebody to leave the thing, or he would suddenly turn to someone and say, look like the flower, but with the serpent beneath it, I know what you're trying to do. He inspired. And that inspiration in a small city like Lucknow, where I keep saying everybody else, Lucknow is the kind of city, Afshin, where I always make this big joke saying my parents painted the house about 10 times in my growing up years, right? And 9 times out of the 10, they painted it white. Once they went really crazy and painted it off-white, because nobody took really crazy decisions. It was a very easy, laid-back city. And I was this Duracell bunny who just wanted to do things. And I was blessed to have parents who very early on gave me the opportunity to say, do what you want. But I was a science student who wanted to be a doctor, but I just loved the theater and the stage. And my dad actually told me at that point in time, saying, do whatever you want. But he also came very consciously and told me, saying, we are both teachers, we are middle-class people, we've just saved this much money, and therefore, the extent of cushion you have available is this much. And that finite limit of knowing that this is where it will end. My dad told me, he said, after this amount of money, if you even ask me for a rupee more, I'm not going to give it to you because I don't have it. I'm not going to ask anyone. And if you come to me with a crazy harebrained scheme on making a film or a radio show or anything, I'm not going to suddenly sell my car or sell this house or do any of that. And I found that to be such a wonderful boundary, because that boundary told me this is my limit. And anything beyond this, I need to do. So school for me really was a wonderful, empowering, enriching space. And La Martiniere is like Hogwarts. If you come to our school, it's better than Hogwarts. It's got a golf course, it's got a brilliant theater, it's got teachers who converse with you, who don't talk down to you. I think all of these things really made school wonderful for me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Roshan. That was really very insightful. And it was wonderful to have you. Thank you for logging in despite the long journey.
Not at all. Thank you, everyone. And thank you once again. I learned so much from everyone else. I was able to log in when Mukund was on. And from all of the people, I've learned so much. So Priya, thank you for giving me this learning opportunity as well.
Yes, my dear, you're welcome. And stay with us as we complete the last segment of this panel discussion with my very dear old friend and colleague, Pooja Jagtiani Jaisingh. It fills my heart to share that this lady says that there are millions who hold back their dreams, either by choice or by compulsion. This is very peculiar of women, especially going through their new journey of motherhood or transiting to become a full-time homemaker. Pooja Jaisingh quit her successful corporate career of 12 plus years with leading brands like Taj Hotels, Invest India, ICICI Prudential, HDFC Bank. However, being a homemaker did not hold back her dreams. While nurturing her son's growing up milestones back in 2013, she got drawn towards entrepreneurship, and today is the principal and founder of the Read, Write, Read Readily Academy, the only accredited educator from the prestigious Linda Mood Bell Academy based in the United States, which trains children with special needs and delayed milestones. And she also runs an award-winning activity center called Fun Ki Pathshala in Mumbai since 2015. Pooja believes that we should stay in the driver's seat of our own life, because if we don't, then life will drive us. Wow, Pooja, how amazing. And I'm going to be leading this conversation with you. It's a great privilege to do this, my dear. So let's get straight into it. And I would like to share the first question with you. Pooja, you had such a promising career, my dear. And I mean, corporate India was like, wanting you to stay back. And yet HDFC Bank, you had to say bid adieu. What made you quit to become a full-time parent?
Okay, I'll be mean if I start directly answering your question. So please bear with me and allow me to first of all thank ICF Mumbai Chapter for giving parenting a very crucial position today, because parenting is positioned with, different sectors, which is healthcare, sustainability, startups, education, and media. It feels nice because I think that's how the role is evolving. And I guess, it's high time that we all get our dues as parent, as a homemaker, who can do integration the best. And I think that's what we spoke when you extended the invite for being a panelist. And yes. It's been a delight to hear so many people and from the industries where I have worked personally. I mean, I come with a very strong corporate background. Yes, and I was feeling nostalgic hearing so many of you. But the positive is that I think diversity is, thought-provoking, and we all are moving towards a common goal. So that's very nice about this panel. And yes, coming back to Priya's question on what really made me quit the promising corporate career at HDFC Bank, which was my last stint, and I went through several exit interviews. The bank allowing me time to rethink my decision, calling me after a span of 4 years to come back, which again I denied. Yes, it's been a big thank you to my son Kabir Jaisingh, who's 12-year-old, and his speech delayed milestones, which got me to think through this decision and be a stay-at-home mom. My husband supported me all the way through. It was not easy, and I think mothers more than fathers experience this significant career switch. So for lots of women, these interruptions may serve as a catalyst to a more balanced life, I would say. And I say would often outweigh any financial benefits which we look for. And yes, I will not deny. Sometimes when I tell my son that, you know what, I'm missing the HDFC ESOPs, he says, I am your stock option, mama. So look for the future. So yes, I mean, it was a difficult decision, but these 12 years have been completely worthwhile because every second, every minute, he has helped me integrate. He's been my support. In fact, he's also an youngest entrepreneur, and I'm very proud of him, the way he's directionally following his mother and father. And I think every parent should take pride for being a stay-at-home mom or dad. As per the data, the numbers are going up, and we should look back at Hindustan Times talking about how dads are also taking a plunge in supporting their wife. And very rightly so, when Mukund Rajan also spoke about ESG and he spoke about his wife coming up with individual ambitions, I think every woman can do it. It's all about integrating it, and integrating it from your doorstep. You don't have to go anywhere. Just believe in yourself.
Wow, just believe in yourself. I love that. So this whole transition of moving from corporate to becoming a parent, I just want to understand, what are the changes you feel that a parent goes through? What are the emotional, what are the feelings that you went through? And how do you feel the transition happened from you to becoming finally an entrepreneur?
Oh God, I'm already emotional, Priya. You're making me go nostalgic and, walk down the memory lane again. But yeah, I would say one of the most difficult things to navigate as a parent of young children, or rather, I would like to say being parent might not always come naturally. So there are many challenges, and I have had an opportunity to learn from my co-mommies, as we talk about in the corporate culture, co-workers. So there are co-mommies who support me, who speak to me. I learn from them, they inspire me. So yeah, a lot changes, I must say. Definition of who you are changes. And so I would want to take this change word away, because we're going to be talking about transforming, evolving. It's a new definition of you. So how you bring it about is up to you completely as a homemaker. And you find an inner strength and confidence, which probably you never had discovered. And I must say, mommies, proudly, I have been on both the sides of the grass. So planning becomes key, and we are the best planners. So if corporates out there are considering taking us, they are definitely making 100% accurate decision of taking us back to their roles. That is if we decide to come back. Yeah. So that's me, of course. And the other changes I would like to kind of share with you is the sense of time improves. Because after I become a mother, I became a mother, I saw that the time management skill kind of grew horizons. It was very different. I was able to achieve more, do more, plan better. Of course, there were sides of frustration when you couldn't complete a task, but it was all about bouncing back, coming back, and doing it, restarting again. So I think, women should not give up that completely. And yes, I think what also changes is you become more equipped. The financial responsibilities, the saving patterns are designed by the homemaker. So I think you all should take this as a strength, because you already had an opportunity and the right skills with you. It's all about materializing and bringing it to use now at the, time when you need it the most, with a young child being added to your family. And yeah, very important and very key changes. Start taking care of yourself. You have little life dependent on you. You have your husband and you have your family, if you're in a joint setup, dependent on you. So yeah, these are the changes, but I would say these are the new things which are added, and we should take it in a very positive attitude and work towards it.
Lovely, Pooja. Very inspiring. And I just want my last question to you, and we're running really late and I'm really mindful of the time here, that, when coaching is a developmental tool, it can help anybody, individuals or organizations. And in this space where, parents are making that choice of leaving corporate to be a full-time parent, and then transitioning maybe into an entrepreneur, and maybe helping their child, of course, with their milestones, etc. What's what do you feel that, how coaching can sort of support you in making these transitions even more smoothly?
Okay. The fact that I think ICF has got parenting onto this panel says it all. Coaching is very important because at some stage of life, when the bird is ready to fly away from the nest, there is a vacuum which moms will build up. And it's not that all moms haven't worked or they can't work, they can.
Yeah.
But it's all about the right inspiration, the right motivation, and the right direction. So navigating them through coaching, like today I'm looking for a mentor for my son because he aims to be in one of the Ivy League colleges going forward. So I keep telling him, you need a good mentor for yourself. So mentoring is very, very crucial. And I think ICF as a coaching parameter can fill this gap because there are many moms out there who need this support, need this motivation, and need enhancement through the coaching parameters, which will really help them to redefine their life forward.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you so much, Pooja, for your lovely responses and your effervescent beingness, as always. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm gonna ask all the panelists at this point in time to unmute themselves and come on video. This is now an open house. We really would like to take all questions. Sarita, I'd like you to, go ahead and ask the questions, or if any of the panelists have questions for, any of the guests have questions for the panelists.
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether the guests have questions, but I do have some questions from the
Yes,
audience.
please go right ahead.
I could alternate with the audience and the panelists' questions. So Mukund, I hope you're here with us. We have a question for you.
Sure, shoot. And actually, I had a couple of questions for my fellow panelists,
Yes,
if you permit.
Sure.
Mukund, this question comes from Tushima, who wants to know what would be the key themes or challenges that sustainability professionals are going to deal with in the future.
Well, I think in terms of critical issues, most importantly, obviously, staring us in the face as an existential crisis is global warming and climate change. And two ways of looking at it. One is in terms of mitigations or finding solutions, but the other is adaptation, assuming that there is a certain amount of global warming that's already baked in. We've just seen March was the hottest March in 100+ years across this country. So there's some amount of warming that's already baked in that you can't do anything about. How do you prepare communities to face that? So I think those would be, two of the biggest challenges the sustainability community has to really reckon with. And then, of course, some of the points that I made about corporations, businesses, the kind of proactiveness that they need to demonstrate, the readiness to address a whole bunch of questions that are being asked on the ESG framework. Those would be other challenges that top of mind, I'd say, is important.
Yeah, thank you. And you have a question for somebody in the panel?
Yes, indeed, because I think it speaks to maybe the issue of our times just now. Both for Mrs. Isaacs and for Roshan. Mrs. Isaacs talked about this need for a larger humanitarian outlook. And she gave the example of studying 2 years of history at Princeton. And in similar sort of vein, I think the point Roshan made about creativity, that we've gone beyond the tipping point. So my question to Mrs. Isaacs was really, in schools, what do we need to do to really create much greater awareness? At the same time, we're talking about critical thinking. So you can't stop students from asking the difficult questions, some of which also feeds into a lot of the narrative around the themes around hate that you see in this country. People asking tough questions, not necessarily getting the right answers, and then forming their own conclusions. So you can't stop people questioning, but how do you create that broader humanitarian outlook? And for Roshan, my question was, in similar vein, are you seeing any hopeful signs on the news that we get served? I certainly, amongst many of my peer group, have stopped watching television news. I know some of it is being made up in social media, but are you hopeful about the future, given the access now people have to different channels and platforms to gain information? Or are we all sort of moving into our own respective echo chambers and hearing what we wish to hear and discounting the rest? So just questions to both of them on signs of hope for the future, hopefully.
Thank you, Mukund. I'll have Mrs. Isaac take her question.
But I just think that, if we just encourage children and tell them that, you can be whatever you want to be, and you need to be, what is it? What is your passion in life? What is that you really want? We often push children into little cubby holes and say that this is what you should do. and don't allow them really to experience life and experience the subject that they may want to do, you know. So actually what as schools or we can do is to give a open platform for children to experiment or experience or all these things, and not to make and not to weigh them and say that that, you know, this is better than that. But actually, we also need to get the parents in on the same on the same platform. You see, very often if the children may talk to us about something, but the parent will say, "No, I want you to become this. You have to become a doctor, or you have to become a surgeon." You see, if we are just able to give that kind of freedom to our children to choose what they want, to be happy with what they want, I think, and if we encourage them right from the start, give them the kind of reading opportunities, that kind of opportunity, for example, creativity, theater, all this sort of thing, if the school can give it to them and encourage it, I am positive that we can do all this. We do try to do all this. And actually, you know, as you were saying, people change. I've seen so many of our kids move from you know, being, what shall I say, people who do the right thing according to their parents, to going into theater, to going into the arts, to going into creativity. And they're so happy and they're doing so beautifully well. I just think the encouragement has to be there without any sort of, you know, what shall I say, hindrance to that happening.
Yeah, so, you know, what I hear, I pick up the word encouragement and maybe an open dialogue, transparency, trust, parent and children. And I think that answers the question my colleague Ashish had put in as to what do you think would be the 2 or 3 things that a community would need to help youngsters, especially move from that parameter of success to being, you know, content and healthy. So I think that sort of answers into that question. So thank you very much, Mrs. Isaac. I'll come back to Roshan for that question that Mukund put across. And one question from me also, Roshan, do you think we need to chuck all the dating apps and have a creator mode app now?
Well, I'll first take Mukund's question, because honestly, really, I think there's such a dearth of news in the sense that we knew it, that people are finding. So again, I think the creator economy is finding, and Web 3.0 is finding these methodologies where people are creating their own sources of news. So if you look at things like News Laundry, or even if you look at Substack as a medium by itself, these are becoming places where people are going to consume their news, or The Wire, or The Print, or Quint, which unfortunately, when I was reading today, has had over a 50% investment by one of the biggest industrialists. And, you know, I don't know what the future of that medium is now going to be. But I do think that people are picking and choosing their news. The only issue is that this seems to still be very language-centric with an English bias. And we must understand that not more than 2 to 4% maybe consume their news in English. The problem is that everybody else is consuming it either in a regional language or in Hindi, and that diaspora is still, it has a couple of brave journalists who are doing what, you know, what I think is right. But have they found themselves the right medium to be able to propagate it at a larger level? I think it's work in progress. But definitely I am seeing some amount of, I mean, there are some green shoots, I would say, that's happening in that space. Youngsters also are not consuming news at all. But unfortunately, this way of, you know, what we keep talking about, IT cells, etc., working to control narratives on various mediums, they have also entered. I mean, look at what happened to an app like Clubhouse. The minute Clubhouse launched on Android, it completely became, you know, no longer was there a conversation. It was a diatribe coming from one particular angle. And that completely destroyed the platform. Nobody goes there. Or how Twitter was meant to be a place where there was conversation. Now you had this whole bit of bots and trolls, etc. And then ultimately people turned and said, you know what, this is not for us, hum apna bana lete hain, and they found coup. So my worry about these echo chambers is really, really a lot. To your question about, you know, honestly, there are a bunch of great creator apps that are starting. But frankly, people being able to date at a level of creativity or at the level of conversation is something that is a pressing need. And I really feel that there is a great space in which we need to get the 2 years of being purely on digital. Frankly, I think that the joy of doing some physical conversations is so important. And I would actually just tell people that, date a creative art and date a creative stranger if you can. I can't tell you the amount of the way it enriches your life. And to finally just put a thing on that, I always tell people saying that your network is your net worth. Build a creative network. Just keep building a larger and larger network of creators. Cut out the people who only add noise to your conversations. Cut them out. Be brutal. But keep the ones who you value and keep increasing that circle. And it is so enriching.
Wow. I know Priya is looking at the time, but there are some very interesting questions and I do want to take them up. And thanks, Roshan, for that. Your network is your net worth. I think that's going to resonate with a lot of us. Manoj, this is for you, because what your analogy of a tennis coach and a CEO with a coach and the difference between that being acceptable and this being a stigma. The question is from Anuradha as to both sides. What do the CEO need to do to ensure that this expectation or the stigma is removed? And what do the coaches need to do to create the space where they can be seen as a badge of honor instead of a stigma?
Yeah, no, thanks, Sarita. Yeah, my analogy of stigma is that I think a lot of leaders, or not only in corporate life, but otherwise as well, are not really open to talk about that they have a coach. Yeah, and I guess the more open and transparent they become, obviously it becomes more acceptable. Yeah, it is surprising. We still in this DNA age has to really convince someone that he needs a coach, which is not the case in many other professions, but I think at least in the corporate world it is. What the coaches can do also is to encourage. I think encouraging open communications about it. Of course, coaches make people like us look good. Yeah, but I guess sometimes people like us can make coaches look good, and that's sort of an understanding and a communication exercise. Yeah. Roshan and I come from the same city, Lucknow, and I think the gift of the gab is also important there. How do we communicate in a manner which is not stepping on the shoes of a coach? But I think due credit is sometimes important. We all go to movies, right? But we rarely stay right till the end when there are the credits. Yeah. And in life, particularly for coaching, how do you give credits is important, because that communicates, and there are many ways to give credits. Yeah, even an Instagram picture, you can take it and put it, and you don't know who has clicked it, but if you give credit, it gives a lot of value to the person who has clicked those photographs. Yeah, so giving credit to coaches and similarly coaches accepting those credit gracefully is important, and it would also set a good foundation for coaches to be, not only liked in the corporate life, but also making sure, their value is being appreciated across the spectrum. Yeah, that's how I would say.
Yeah, Manoj, I think the credit part or the appreciation for the work that coaches do will really take the bar higher. I have a question for Pooja as a parent, maybe Savita Tilak asking, she's asked it generally, but I feel, Pooja, you would be best to respond as to how may coaches be able to open up the minds of parents and teachers towards encouraging them to walk on the path of creativity-oriented profession.
I think she has a very strong question, and I have a very straightforward, short and sweet answer. Teachers are the coaches for students. So I'm sure they definitely are looking for somebody to also give them diverse views, support and inspiration, and help them navigate differently. So Savita, I did read your question, and I guess, yeah, it is required, and all schools should definitely have a separate session. We do a lot of debate, drama, and why not coaching? Because they are getting ready for future, and today's professional courses, and when they step out in the world, is way different from what it was when we were in the education space. So yeah, I guess this is what I wish to add to what she asked. I hope I was able to answer a little bit, if not complete answer.
So let me pause here and ask the panelists if they have any question for the other panelists before I take up one or two audience questions. All right. This is a question for everybody, and maybe anybody who choose to answer is how important is being resilient for everyone in the current times? And this is asked by Tarun. So anybody would like to take a shot at this one?
Being resilient.
Yes.
I think being resilient is very, very important, because especially as a person in education, I have seen how children can just be so overwhelmed by what is happening with them, and by the expectations that that are put on their shoulders, that they just kind of crumble and fall. And therefore, this is one thing that we may make it a point. I mean, you're talking about coaching. We have counselors and we have teachers who are trained in that also, in addition to counselors, where we tell the children, we talk to the kids and tell them that this is so important, that you need to get up and move on. You need to be able to take the good with the bad. It's not always going to be a bed of roses. You're going to see life. You're going to see life in different ways, and it is very, very important that you're able to get up, move on, dust yourself up, take the knocks of life, and get on with it. It's most important.
I hope down the line we'll see schools having coaches, not just counselors, but even coaches.
Yes, it looks like that to me. Yes.
Yeah. But another question for you from Prasad, Mrs. Isaac, is what needs to be done to enable students to ask more questions in the school and not just answer the questions?
Oh yeah, actually, it just depends also on the ethos of the school. What does the school encourage? And well, frankly, I think our kids do ask a lot of questions. They are. And in fact, their questions are very interesting, and you learn a lot from them with their questions, and it makes you think, oh my goodness, I've never thought of this bit earlier. But I mean, kids are the greatest teachers. They honestly are. And they're such fun, really. And they ask a tremendous number of questions, and they keep you on your toes. There's no question about it. Very often you've got to say, listen, I really don't have an answer for that. Let me think about it there, or let me find out and get back to you.
Yeah, but I think that there's also the other side where I have Riturana wanting to know, why can't teachers have coaches?
Not a bad idea at all.
Yeah.
Right.
They lay the foundation, right, for learning. So why not have coaches for teachers also? Right.
Lovely.
So Priya, that's from the audience. I think I've covered all.
Thank you very much, everyone. There is a poll that's coming up right now. Shripat, please go ahead and launch it. Sorry about taking more time than what we had allocated for this webinar, but I really felt that the conversations are so valuable to bring so much, attention to the kind of futures that each of you are seeing. And I really want that, each of these conversations are going to be shared. We do have a YouTube channel where we'll be putting these conversations out there. We hope all of you are going to enjoy soaking in all the wisdom that each of our beautiful panelists have shared here this evening. Thank you very much. Stay awesome, stay safe, and above all, believe in coaching, because we do believe as coaches that this is the preferred leadership, individual, corporate, and teams developmental tool. So reach out to coaches at ICF Mumbai. This is a pitch, but you must reach out to coaches, and we'll be happy to be of service in any of the fields that you think that's best. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening and a good night. It's such a joy to have you. Thank you, Mukund.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mrs. Isaacs, Roshan, Manoj, Urvashi. Thank you very much, Pooja. It's such a joy to have you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.